Captain Jake Morrison stared at the endless black of space through the observation window of Horizon's Edge Station. 15 years had passed since humanity last spoke to the galaxy, and 15 years since the galaxy last cared what humans had to say. The memory still burned in his mind like acid poured on an open wound. The great hall of the Galactic Council had echoed with laughter when Earth's ambassadors proposed the Human Protection Initiative. Laughter from beings who had never known what it meant to fight for survival every single day of their existence. The Zephyrian delegate had stood up from his crystal throne and pointed one of his 4 arms at the human delegation. His voice carried the tone of someone explaining simple math to a child when he declared that beings from Category 9 Deathworlds were too primitive and violent to understand civilized governance. The hegemony representative had nodded in agreement while cleaning his scales with a jeweled tool. Even the Peaceful Traders Federation had whispered among themselves about the dangerous humans who came from a world that tried to kill everything living on its surface. Jake remembered watching the footage of Ambassador Collins walking out of that hall with his head held high but his shoulders shaking with barely controlled rage. The man had spent 20 years learning alien languages and customs, just to be told that humans were nothing more than clever animals who had somehow learned to build spaceships. That night, Earth's government made a decision that would change everything. If the galaxy wanted to pretend humans did not exist, then humans would give them exactly what they wished for. Lisa Kane worked at her station monitoring the endless stream of galactic communications that flowed through space like digital rivers. Her job was to listen and record, but never to respond. She had been doing this for 8 years now, and the patterns had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Trade disputes that escalated into shooting wars because no one had the backbone to enforce peace. Slaver raids against peaceful colonies while the council debated the legal definitions of sentient rights. Entire species going extinct while committees formed to study the problem. Ryan Brooks sat nearby analyzing tactical data from conflicts across the galaxy. His screens showed fleet movements and battle reports from dozens of ongoing wars. The man had served in Earth's old navy before the withdrawal, and he understood what he was seeing better than anyone else on the station. The galaxy was eating itself alive, one system at a time. Without a strong hand to maintain order, the various empires and federations had begun testing each other's boundaries. Like wild animals circling a fresh kill, Amy Foster emerged from the engineering section wiping grease from her hands with a rag that had seen better days. She kept the station running with spare parts and determination because Earth no longer sent supply ships to their distant outposts. The official story was that humanity had pulled back to focus on internal development. The truth was more complicated and more dangerous than most people realized. Jake watched Amy work and remembered the briefings he had received before taking command of this station. Earth's fleets had not been disbanded as the galaxy believed. Earth's colonies had not been abandoned as the intelligence reports suggested. Earth's industrial capacity had not collapsed as the trade networks assumed. Everything the galaxy thought they knew about humanity was carefully crafted deception designed to make them look elsewhere, while Earth prepared for something the Council could never imagine. The communication arrays picked up fragments of transmissions from the outer rim territories where something vast and hungry was moving between the stars. Entire systems had gone dark over the past 2 years, but the Council treated each incident as an isolated event. They sent investigators who never returned and formed committees to study reports that never arrived. Jake had watched this pattern develop with growing unease because he understood what the soft species of the inner worlds could not grasp. There were things in the galaxy that did not negotiate or trade or form treaties. There were species that consumed everything in their path and grew stronger with each world they devoured. Earth's military planners had identified at least 3 such threats during humanity's brief time as a galactic power. The Council had dismissed these warnings as primitive fear-mongering from a species too violent to understand peaceful coexistence. Lisa looked up from her station with concern written across her face. The latest intelligence reports showed refugee fleets fleeing from something in the galactic void. Hundreds of ships packed with civilians from species she had never heard of were running toward the inner worlds with stories of horror that made no sense. They spoke of living ships that grew from consumed metal and machine intelligences that converted organic beings into synthetic slaves. Ryan confirmed what Lisa had discovered by cross-referencing the reports with his tactical database. The pattern was clear to anyone who bothered to look. Something was systematically destroying every form of civilization it encountered and moving steadily toward the core worlds where the Council met in their crystal palaces. The estimated timeline put this threat at the inner systems within 2 years if current expansion rates continued. Jake made his daily report to Earth Command knowing that someone was listening even though no one ever responded. He transmitted updates on galactic political situations and military developments and threat assessments that would help Earth's leaders make decisions about humanity's future. Somewhere in the Sol system, people were reading his words and planning for possibilities that the galaxy refused to acknowledge. The station continued its silent watch over a galaxy that grew more dangerous with each passing day. Jake and his crew were the eyes and ears of a species that had been written off as primitive, but had never stopped preparing for the day when the galaxy would need them again. They monitored communications and analyzed intelligence and waited for the signal that would bring humanity back to the stars. None of them knew that signal would come sooner than expected or that it would change everything they thought they understood about their place in the universe. The distress signal came through the Deep Space Monitoring Array at exactly 1400 hours station time, when most of the crew was eating their midday meal in the cramped cafeteria. Lisa Kane was the first to hear it because she always ate at her station while monitoring the communication channels. The transmission was weak and broken by interference, but something about its desperate tone made her stop chewing her protein bar and focus all her attention on the incoming data. Dr. Elena Vasquez rushed to the communication station when Lisa called for her over the intercom. Elena had been the station's linguist for 6 years and could decode messages in over 40 different alien languages. She plugged her translation equipment into the main console and began working to clean up the signal while Lisa boosted the receiver power to maximum levels. The words that emerged from the static made Elena's hands shake as she typed them into the computer. The message was in Etherian, which was a language she knew well because the Etherians had been among the few species to show genuine kindness to human diplomats during the early contact years. They were peaceful beings who lived on a garden world called Sanctuary and spent their time creating beautiful art and music that could make other species weep with its beauty. Jake Morrison arrived at the communication station just as Elena finished the initial translation. Her face was pale and tears were running down her cheeks as she read the words aloud in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. The Etherians were under attack by something they called the Swarm. Their orbital defenses had been destroyed, and their cities were burning. Millions of civilians were trapped on the surface with no way to escape. The most heartbreaking part of the message came at the end when the Etherian speaker mentioned humans by name. They remembered the human diplomats who had visited their world 20 years ago and spoken about protecting innocent species from galactic predators. They were calling out to humanity across the void because they believed humans were the only ones who might actually come to help them when the Council would only send investigators to study the situation. Ryan Brooks pulled up the tactical data for the Sanctuary system, and his expression grew grim as he studied the information. The Etherians had no military ships, and their technology was focused on peaceful applications like agriculture and medicine. They were completely defenseless against any kind of serious military assault. If something was attacking them, then they would be wiped out within days unless someone intervened. Amy Foster joined the group around the communication station and listened as Elena played the message again. The engineer's jaw tightened with anger as she heard the desperation in the Etherian voice. These were people who had never hurt anyone, and now they were dying because the galaxy's so-called peacekeepers were too weak or too cowardly to protect them from monsters. Jake faced the hardest decision of his career as he stared at the translation on Elena's screen. Humanity had been silent for 15 years, and revealing themselves now could expose Earth to the same dangers that were consuming Sanctuary. The official orders were clear about maintaining communication silence under all circumstances. But there were other orders that went deeper than official policy and spoke to something fundamental about what it meant to be human. The crew debated the situation in hushed voices while monitoring for additional transmissions from the Sanctuary system. Ryan argued that exposing their position could bring destruction to Earth itself if this swarm threat was as dangerous as the Etherians claimed. Amy countered that hiding while innocent people died was exactly the kind of cowardice that made humans leave the galactic community in the first place. Lisa reminded everyone that their monitoring station was just one small outpost and they had no authority to make decisions about humanity's return to galactic affairs. That kind of choice had to come from Earth Command or from the Hidden Fleet commanders who really controlled human military assets. But Elena pointed out that the Etherians might not have enough time for bureaucratic procedures and committee meetings. Jake made his choice knowing that it would change everything for humanity and probably for the galaxy as well. He walked to the secure communication console and activated the quantum transmitter that connected directly to Earth Command. The message he composed was short and simple, but it carried the weight of 15 years of isolation and preparation. The response came back faster than Jake had expected, which told him that someone very important had been waiting for exactly this kind of situation. Admiral Patricia Hayes was the highest-ranking officer in Earth's Hidden Fleet, and her reply carried the authority of Earth's government behind it. Operation Sleeping Giant was now active, and humanity's real fleet was about to reveal itself to a galaxy that had forgotten what humans were capable of achieving. Jake felt a mixture of relief and terror as he read the Admiral's orders. Relief because humanity would not abandon the Etherians to die alone in the darkness. Terror because he understood what Operation Sleeping Giant really meant for the balance of power in the galaxy. Earth had been preparing for this moment for 15 years, and now they were about to show everyone what a species from a death world could accomplish when they put their minds to it. The crew worked through the night monitoring communications and preparing situation reports for the fleet that was already moving toward the Sanctuary system. Jake sent everything they had learned about the swarm threat and the tactical situation in that region of space. He also transmitted the cultural and linguistic data that Elena had compiled about the Etherians so the rescue fleet would know exactly who they were trying to save. Elena continued monitoring for additional transmissions from Sanctuary, but the signals were growing weaker as the hours passed. Either the Etherian communication equipment was being destroyed, or there were fewer Etherians left alive to send messages. Both possibilities made her sick to her stomach as she thought about the gentle beings who had shown kindness to human visitors. Amy began preparing the station for whatever might come next because she understood that humanity's emergence from isolation would have consequences that none of them could predict. The galaxy had been drifting toward chaos for years, and Earth's intervention might push events in directions that would reshape the political structure of known space. Jake watched the tactical displays showing fleet movements in the Sanctuary system and knew that within days the galaxy would learn that humanity had never really gone away. They had been watching and waiting and building strength for the moment when someone innocent would call for help. That moment had finally arrived, and the sleeping giant was about to wake up. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood in the command center of Titan Base, watching the massive displays that showed the true extent of humanity's hidden fleet. 15 years of careful planning and construction had created something that no alien species would believe possible. While the galaxy assumed Earth's navy had been disbanded, the truth was that humanity had built the most powerful military force in known space. The briefing room filled with ship captains who had been waiting their entire careers for this moment. Captain Ben Carter commanded the dreadnought-used Defiant, which was armed with weapons that could crack planets if necessary. Captain Maria Santos led the carrier UES Stormbringer with fighter squadrons trained to operate in environments that would kill most alien pilots. Captain Nick Reynolds controlled the stealth destroyer UES ghost walker that could appear and disappear like smoke in the void, Admiral Hayes activated the holographic display that showed the galaxy-wide network of hidden bases and shipyards that Earth had constructed during their years of supposed isolation. Automated facilities in the asteroid belts had been producing warships around the clock. Hollow moons throughout human space concealed entire fleets ready to launch at a moment's notice. Supply depots disguised as mining operations could support military campaigns lasting decades. The revelation shocked even the veteran officers who thought they understood the scope of Earth's preparations. Commander Julia Price had been managing logistics from Luna Base, but even she had not known the full extent of the network until now. Hidden shipyards in the Kuiper Belt were already accelerating production schedules to support the fleet activation. Sleeper agents throughout human colonies were shedding their civilian identities to take command of military assets. Captain Alex Turner reported from the exploration vessel UAS Pathfinder about the true nature of humanity's lost colony ships. The galaxy believed these vessels had been destroyed or had vanished into unknown regions of space. The reality was that they had been establishing fortress worlds throughout the galaxy while maintaining complete communication silence. Human military infrastructure now stretched across hundreds of light years. The ships themselves represented human engineering pushed to its absolute limits. The Defiant's main guns were powered by fusion reactors that mimicked the processes inside Earth's volcanic core. The armor plating had been forged in zero-gravity foundries using techniques developed from studying Earth's deep ocean trenches. Every system had been designed by people who understood that their homeworld tried to kill them every single day. Admiral Hayes explained the tactical philosophy behind Earth's fleet designed to the assembled captains. Alien military doctrine focused on overwhelming firepower or advanced shielding or superior speed. Human ships combined all these elements but added something no other species possessed, which was the ability to adapt and survive in impossible situations. Every vessel could repair itself during combat, and every weapon system could modify its output based on enemy responses. The fighters launching from the storm bringer were piloted by men and women whose reflexes had been honed by evolution. On a world full of predators, they could process information and react to threats faster than any alien pilot because their ancestors had needed split-second timing to avoid being eaten by creatures that hunted in Earth's forests and oceans. Modern human pilots took these ancient survival skills and applied them to three-dimensional combat in space. Captain Carter studied the tactical data about the swarm threat and felt a cold anger building in his chest. These creatures consumed entire civilizations and converted organic matter into breeding material for their expanding hive mind. They represented everything that humans had learned to hate during their brief time as a galactic power. The galaxy's civilized species were too soft to fight such monsters, but humans had been dealing with similar threats for their entire evolutionary history. The Ghost Walker and ships like it used stealth technology that had been developed from studying how Earth's apex predators hunted their prey. Human engineers had learned to make their vessels move through space like sharks through water or tigers through tall grass. They could strike without warning and vanish before their enemies could react. No alien species had developed comparable technology because none of them came from worlds where stealth meant survival. Captain Santos reviewed the intelligence reports about the Sanctuary system and began planning fighter deployment strategies. Her pilots would be operating in an environment where the enemy could adapt to their tactics within minutes of first contact. But human pilots had trained for exactly this kind of situation by studying Earth's most dangerous predators and learning how they hunted creatures that could fight back. The fleet's industrial support came from manufacturing facilities that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive human technology. Earth's factories were designed to operate in hostile environments because they had been built by people who understood what it meant to create civilization on a world that actively opposed their existence. These facilities could produce replacement parts and ammunition under conditions that would shut down any alien manufacturing system. Admiral Hayes gave the final briefing about humanity's return to galactic politics and the principles that would guide their actions. Earth would not ask permission from the Council or any other galactic authority. They would protect innocent species and destroy threats to galactic stability. Any force that preyed on the weak would face the full fury of humanity's military power. The orders were distributed to fleet commanders throughout human space, and the Great Awakening began in earnest. Ships that had waited years in hidden bases powered up their engines and began moving toward assigned positions. Communication networks that had maintained silence for 15 years suddenly came alive with tactical data and coordination signals. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had never really left. Captain Reynolds prepared the Ghost Walker for immediate departure to the sanctuary system, where they would gather intelligence about the swarm threat before the main fleet arrived. His ship could observe enemy forces without being detected and provide the tactical information that Admiral Hayes needed to plan the rescue operation. The stealth destroyer vanished into hyperspace like a shadow swallowed by darkness. The dreadnought, Defiant and carrier Stormbringer, followed with their escort vessels, forming the spearhead of humanity's return to the stars. Behind them came dozens of other ships representing every class of vessel in Earth's hidden fleet. The galaxy had forgotten about the humans from the dangerous world, but they were about to be reminded in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral Hayes watched the fleet deployment from her command center and felt a mixture of pride and apprehension about what they were unleashing. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what a species from a death world could accomplish when they decided to protect the innocent. The question was whether the galaxy would be grateful for their intervention or terrified by their power. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the sanctuary system and immediately understood why the Aetherians had sounded so desperate in their distress call. Half of the system had been transformed into a writhing mass of organic machinery that pulsed with sickly bioluminescent light. Swarm ships grew from consumed asteroids like cancer cells multiplying in a petri dish. The sight was enough to make veteran spacers feel nauseous. Captain Ben Carter stood on the bridge of the UES, Defiant, and felt his jaw clench with barely controlled rage as he studied the tactical displays. The beautiful garden world of Sanctuary was dying before his eyes. Its blue oceans were turning brown as swarm bioprocessors converted water into breeding fluid. Its green continents showed spreading patches of gray where the invaders had established their hive structures. The few surviving Aetherian vessels huddled around their homeworld like wounded animals seeking shelter. Their elegant ships were never designed for combat and showed severe damage from desperate attempts to fight off the swarm attackers. Captain Carter could see escape pods and civilian transports still launching from the planet's surface, but most of them were being intercepted and consumed before they could reach safe distance. Captain Maria Santos reviewed the tactical situation from the bridge of the UES Stormbringer and began calculating fighter deployment strategies. Her pilots would be facing an enemy that learned from every encounter and adapted its defenses accordingly. The swarm bioships were already showing modifications based on their battles with Aetherian vessels. But the aliens had never faced opponents who came from a world that taught survival through constant adaptation. The Ghost Walker materialized from stealth mode near the largest cluster of swarm vessels and immediately began transmitting detailed intelligence data to the fleet. Captain Nick Reynolds had been observing the enemy for several hours, and his reports painted a disturbing picture. The swarm was not just destroying Aetherian civilization, but was actively studying it to improve their own capabilities. Admiral Hayes gave the order to attack from her flagship and watched as humanity's hidden fleet revealed itself to the galaxy. The Defiant's main guns opened fire with weapons that had been designed to penetrate the most advanced armor systems known to human science. The energy beams tore through swarm bioships like they were made of tissue paper. Alien vessels that had seemed invincible moments before exploded in brilliant flashes of light, but the human advantage lasted only minutes before the swarm began adapting to their tactics. The hive mind controlling the bioships was unlike anything in Earth's military database. It could process information and implement countermeasures faster than any individual consciousness. Within moments of first contact, swarm vessels began growing armor specifically designed to absorb human energy weapons. Commander Sarah Walsh led her fighter squadron from the Stormbringer into the heart of the battle and immediately understood that they were facing something beyond normal military doctrine. The swarm ships were not just machines, but living creatures that could regenerate damage and modify their behavior in real time. Every successful attack taught the enemy how to defend against similar strikes in the future. Captain Carter realized that conventional tactics would not be sufficient against an opponent that evolved during combat. He ordered the Defiant to begin cycling through different weapon frequencies and firing patterns to prevent the swarm from developing complete immunity to their attacks. The ship's adaptive combat systems began implementing random variations that kept the enemy guessing about human capabilities. Dr. Marcus Webb worked frantically in the fleet's mobile laboratory analyzing swarm tissue samples that had been collected by the Ghost Walker during its reconnaissance mission. The xenobiologist understood that defeating this enemy would require more than superior firepower. They needed to find the biological weakness that would unravel the entire swarm network. The rescue operation became a running battle through a system that was being consumed by living machines. Human ships moved in coordinated formations that protected the surviving Etherian vessels while fighting off waves of swarm attackers. Every human captain had studied Earth's pack hunters and applied those lessons to three-dimensional space combat. Captain Santos watched her pilots adapt their tactics in real time as the swarm learned to counter their initial attacks. But human pilots had advantages that no alien could match. They had been shaped by evolution on a world where hesitation meant death and where survival required split-second decision-making under impossible conditions. When the swarm adapted to their tactics, the pilots simply developed new ones. The battle for Sanctuary became a test of adaptability between two very different forms of intelligence. The swarm's hive mind could process vast amounts of information and implement changes across thousands of bioships simultaneously. But humans had learned adaptability on an individual level where every person needed to survive in environments that changed without warning. Admiral Hayes coordinated the overall battle plan while studying the patterns in swarm behavior that Dr. Webb was identifying through his biological analysis. The enemy was incredibly sophisticated, but it followed predictable rules based on evolutionary programming. If they could understand those rules, then they could exploit the weaknesses that evolution had built into every living system. Captain Reynolds used the Ghost Walker's stealth capabilities to strike at swarm command nodes that coordinated the bioship formations. Human stealth technology was based on predator behavior from Earth's most dangerous hunters. The enemy could adapt to direct attacks but had no defense against opponents who could become invisible and strike from unexpected directions. The turning point came when Dr. Webb discovered the quantum communication network that connected all swarm organisms across galactic distances. The hive mind's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability, because disrupting the network would isolate individual bioships and reduce them to mindless animals operating on basic survival instincts. Captain Carter led the attack on the central swarm nexus that maintained the quantum communication links throughout the system. The Defiant's weapons had been modified based on Dr. Webb's research to disrupt the biological quantum processors that kept the hive mind connected. The massive biostructure that had been coordinating the entire invasion collapsed into twitching fragments. The effect on the remaining swarm forces was immediate and devastating. Bioships that had been operating as parts of a vast collective intelligence suddenly found themselves alone and confused. Without the hive mind to coordinate their actions, they began attacking each other, or simply drifting aimlessly through space. Commander Walsh and her fighter pilots took advantage of the chaos to destroy the remaining swarm vessels before they could re-establish communication links. Human pilots moved through the confused enemy formations like wolves hunting scattered sheep. The battle that had seemed impossible to win moments before became a systematic elimination of isolated threats. The rescue of the surviving Etherians continued even as the last swarm bioships were being destroyed. Human ships moved close to the dying planet to evacuate civilians and provide medical assistance to the wounded. For the first time in decades, a species facing extinction had found protectors who were willing to fight impossible odds to save innocent lives. The footage of human ships cutting through the swarm fleet like reapers through wheat spread across galactic communication networks faster than anyone could have imagined. Captain Lisa Chun commanded the scout ship UES Messenger and her primary mission was to broadcast the battle recordings to every inhabited system within range. The galaxy needed to see what humanity was capable of achieving when they decided to protect the innocent within hours of the sanctuary. Rescue. Every major news network was showing images of the human fleet in action. Alien reporters struggled to find words that could describe the devastating efficiency of Earth's military forces. The bioships that had seemed invincible were reduced to floating debris by weapons that most species had never seen before. The tactical coordination displayed by human commanders was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session in their Crystal Palace on the core world of Nexus Prime. Counselor Vex of the Hegemony stood before the assembly with his scaled features twisted in confusion and anger. He demanded to know how the primitive Deathworlders had acquired technology that made the Council's combined fleets look like children's toys. The footage from Sanctuary showed human ships using weapons and tactics that violated everything the Council thought they knew about Earth's capabilities. Counselor Zara of the Trade Federation insisted that the recordings had to be fabricated because peaceful humans could never have built such a powerful war fleet. She argued that some other species was using human identity as a cover for their own military operations. But the biological scans from the battle site confirmed that the ship crews were indeed human and that their technology was based on principles that only Earth scientists understood. The reaction across the galaxy was immediate and polarized along predictable lines. Peaceful species that had been suffering under the current system flooded human communication channels with requests for protection and alliance. Their messages told stories of slavery and genocide and systematic oppression that the Council had been unable or unwilling to address. For the first time in generations, these species had hoped that someone would fight for their rights. Aggressive empires and predator species responded with threats and denunciations. The Hegemony issued a formal declaration calling humanity galactic terrorists who threatened the established order. The Slaver Consortium demanded that the Council take immediate action to contain the human threat before it spread to other systems. They understood better than anyone that Earth's emergence would make their traditional prey species much harder to capture. Captain Dave Miller received orders to take the UES Retribution to the Kepler system, where local government forces had been fighting hegemony slavers for over 6 months. The Council had ignored repeated requests for assistance, while entire populations were being captured and sold in alien markets. Miller's instructions were simple and direct. Destroy the slavers and send a message that humanity would not tolerate the abuse of innocent beings. The battle at Kepler lasted exactly 17 minutes from first contact to complete enemy destruction. The Hegemony slaver fleet had been designed to intimidate peaceful civilian populations, not to fight opponents who understood modern warfare. Human weapons tore through their outdated shields and armor like they were made of cardboard. Miller offered surrender terms exactly once before implementing what Fleet Command called the Fury of the Death World. President Kate Morgan addressed the United Earth Assembly in a session that would be remembered as the moment humanity chose its path among the stars. She stood at the podium wearing a simple business suit, but her words carried the authority of a species that had decided to reshape galactic civilization. The Harrison Doctrine that she announced would guide Earth's future relationships with all alien species. The doctrine was elegantly simple and absolutely uncompromising. Humanity would protect any species that asked for help, regardless of their location or political status. Any force that preyed on innocent beings would be destroyed without negotiation or mercy. Earth would never again ask permission from councils or committees that were too weak to enforce peace. The age of prey species cowering before predators was officially over. The galaxy's response to the Harrison Doctrine revealed the true extent of corruption and weakness that had infected the current system. Species that had been secretly enslaved for generations began broadcasting requests for liberation. Planets that had been strip-mined by corporate interests asked for protection from economic exploitation. Even some council member species privately contacted Earth to request assistance against internal threats. Admiral Hayes broadcast humanity's response to the Council's demands for explanation and submission. Her message was transmitted on every frequency and translated into every known language so that no being in the galaxy could claim ignorance of Earth's position. She spoke with the calm confidence of someone who held overwhelming military superiority and the moral authority that came from actually protecting the innocent. The Admiral's words became the foundation for everything that followed. Humanity was not joining the Galactic Council because the Council had proven itself incapable of maintaining peace or protecting the weak. Earth was not seeking permission for their actions because they owed no allegiance to institutions that had rejected their offers of alliance. The humans were replacing a failed system with something that actually worked. Commander Julia Price coordinated the massive logistics operation required to support Earth's expanding military commitments. Supply ships moved between hidden bases and combat zones carrying everything the fleet needed to maintain operations across hundreds of light years. The industrial capacity that alien economists had dismissed as primitive manufacturing was revealed to be the most sophisticated production network in the galaxy. The transformation of galactic politics accelerated as more species requested human protection and more aggressive powers found their expansion plans blocked by Earth's fleets. Trade routes that had been controlled by pirates for decades became safe passages under human escort. Peaceful colonies that had lived in fear of slaver raids began developing their economies, knowing that help would come if they called for it. Captain Gary Stevens took command of the UES Sanctuary, which was the first of humanity's mobile fortress cities, designed to provide safe harbor for refugee species. The massive vessel could house millions of beings while they rebuilt their lives after escaping oppression. It represented everything that made humans different from other galactic powers because it was designed to protect rather than conquer. The news networks continued broadcasting footage of human military operations as Earth's fleet systematically dismantled the galaxy's predator species. Each battle demonstrated new aspects of human tactical doctrine and technological superiority. Alien military analysts struggled to understand weapons and strategies that seemed to violate fundamental principles of space warfare, but the most shocking revelation was still to come when deep space monitoring stations detected massive fleet movements from previously unknown human bases throughout the galaxy. The species that had supposedly withdrawn from galactic politics 15 years ago had actually been building the largest military force in recorded history. The sleeping giant had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the single distress signal from Sanctuary awakened humanity, the galaxy had become unrecognizable to anyone who remembered the old order. The Terran Federation controlled the most powerful military force in known space, but their true strength lay in something no previous galactic power had ever possessed. They used their overwhelming superiority to protect the weak rather than exploit them for profit or pleasure. Captain Gary Stevens walked through the observation decks of the UES Sanctuary and watched refugee families from a dozen different species learning to live together in safety. The massive fortress city housed over 3 million beings who had escaped slavery or genocide or simple neglect under the old system. Children who had never known security were playing games in the common areas while their parents learned new skills that would help them build better lives. The swarm threat had been eliminated through a combination of human military power and scientific innovation that showcased everything Earth brought to galactic civilization. Dr. Marcus Webb's research into the hive mind's quantum communication network had led to the development of weapons that could sever the connection between individual bioships and their collective intelligence. Without coordination, the swarm organisms became harmless animals that could be easily contained, but the swarm had been just the beginning of humanity's campaign to clean up the galaxy's predator species. Captain Rachel Price led a task force hunting the Void Touched, which was a machine intelligence that had been converting organic beings into synthetic slaves for over 2 centuries. Her ships used human-computer technology that could outthink artificial intelligence systems while maintaining the biological intuition that machines could never replicate. The liberation of the hegemony's breeding worlds became a model for everything that followed. Captain Tom Wilson coordinated the rescue of billions of beings who had been raised like livestock for the galactic slave trade. Human medical teams worked around the clock to rehabilitate people who had never known freedom, while engineers dismantled the industrial facilities that had supported centuries of systematic oppression. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Terra Rising, which served as humanity's mobile capital and symbol of their commitment to galactic justice. The massive vessel contained everything needed to govern liberated territories and support species, making the transition from oppression to freedom. It represented a completely different approach to galactic politics based on protection rather than exploitation. The old Galactic Council still existed, but only as a ceremonial body that met occasionally to discuss trade regulations and cultural exchanges. Real power now flowed through the Terran Protection Network, which guaranteed the safety of any species willing to follow 3 simple rules. No slavery of sentient beings under any circumstances. No genocide or systematic oppression of other species. No preying on innocent civilians for economic or political gain. The enforcement of these rules was swift and absolute. Species that violated the network's principles found themselves facing the combined might of Earth's fleets and the growing number of allied civilizations who remembered what peace felt like. The human military doctrine was elegant in its simplicity, because it gave every aggressor exactly 1 chance to surrender before facing complete destruction. President Kate Morgan reviewed reports from across the galaxy while sitting in her office aboard Terra Rising. The transformation had exceeded even the most optimistic projections from Earth's strategic planners. Over 200 species had requested membership in the protection network, and the number grew larger every week. Entire sectors that had been war zones for generations were now peaceful trading regions, where different cultures could interact without fear. The galaxy's economic structure had changed as dramatically as its political landscape. Trade routes that had been controlled by pirates and protection rackets were now open to any merchant willing to follow basic safety regulations. The human fleet provided escort services for civilian ships and maintained patrol schedules that made interstellar commerce safer than it had been in living memory. Captain Lisa Chung commanded a deep space exploration vessel that was mapping previously unknown regions beyond the galactic rim. Her mission was to locate other threats like the swarm before they could establish footholds in civilized space. The early warning network that Earth was building would give the galaxy advance notice of dangers that might require military intervention. The most remarkable change was in the attitude of species that had previously lived in constant fear. Children from peaceful worlds could grow up knowing that monsters would not come in the night to steal them from their families. Parents could plan for their offspring's futures without worrying about slavers or genocide campaigns. Entire civilizations were rediscovering arts and sciences that had been abandoned during centuries of survival-focused existence. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked with teams of alien linguists to document languages and cultures that had nearly been lost during the years of chaos. Her translation work had evolved from simple communication support to preserving the heritage of species that were finally safe enough to remember their own histories. The cultural renaissance happening across the galaxy was as important as the military victories that made it possible. The human approach to governance surprised many alien observers who had expected Earth to establish a traditional empire based on resource extraction and tribute collection. Instead, the Terran Federation focused on building infrastructure that supported local development and protected indigenous rights. Human engineering teams helped rebuild destroyed worlds while respecting the cultural preferences of their inhabitants. Captain Ben Carter now commanded a battle group responsible for hunting down the remnants of the galaxy's predator species. His ships had become legendary among both human allies and surviving enemies. The Defiant and vessels like it represented something that no galactic civilization had seen before, which was overwhelming military power used exclusively for protective purposes. The technological advantages that humanity brought to the galaxy extended far beyond their weapons and ships. Human medical science was saving lives that alien doctors had written off as hopeless. Human agricultural techniques were turning barren worlds into garden planets that could support massive populations. Human manufacturing systems were producing goods that improved living standards for billions of beings. Admiral Hayes received daily intelligence reports about threats emerging from the galactic void, where unknown dangers lurked beyond the reach of conventional exploration. The Deep Space Monitoring Network was detecting signals that suggested vast intelligences moving between star clusters. Some of these entities made the swarm look like a minor nuisance by comparison. Captain Jake Morrison had been promoted to command the exploration vessel SOS Horizon, which was designed for long-range reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. His crew included many of the same people who had monitored the galaxy's decline from their isolated station. Now they were actively searching for the next threat that might require humanity's intervention. The latest distress signal reached human space from beyond the galactic rim, where an unknown species faced extinction at the hands of something that consumed entire star systems. The transmission was weak and fragmented, but the desperation was unmistakable. Morrison looked at his crew and asked the question that had become humanity's defining characteristic in their new role as galactic guardians. The bridge crew of the Horizon responded with expressions that showed they had already made their decision. Ryan Brooks was analyzing the tactical implications of operating beyond known space. Amy Foster was calculating the engineering requirements for extended deep space operations. Lisa Kane was working to improve the signal quality so they could learn more about whoever was calling for help. Morrison opened a communication channel to Admiral Hayes and requested permission to investigate the unknown threat. The response came back immediately with authorization to proceed and orders to gather as much intelligence as possible about whatever was destroying civilizations beyond the galactic boundary. The human fleet would follow wherever innocent beings needed protection. The SOS Horizon disappeared into hyperspace, carrying the hopes of a galaxy that had learned to trust in humanity's commitment to protecting the innocent. Behind them, the Terran Protection Network continued expanding as more species joined the alliance that guaranteed their safety. The Deathworlders had awakened, and their fleet would continue rising to meet every challenge that threatened the peace they had created.